Hello, everyone, and thank you. We're just checking the system, make sure that everything is up and running. We're going to be starting very shortly. Dr. Art Laffer will be calling in live and speaking with us exclusively here. No Soundbites Allowed. We have several guests in studio with us who will be joining in the conversation with Dr. Art Laffer, and I hope everyone's going to enjoy. I will mention it right now as we're getting ready to get everything set for you. If you have gotten a message somehow that this event is happening at the Binghamton Hilton or at a location in Binghamton, that is incorrect. It seems someone has sent out disinformation to take people away from the event itself. How's it going?
It looks good. Live stream's going good.
Okay, so we're going to go live here. Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. Happy to be here with you. I have in studio with me John Orstucia.
Hello.
And I also have John Lezak. We're both here.
Hello.
And everyone's live. We've got them both in frame right now, so that's very positive. In a few moments, we're going to have Dr. Art Laffer in as well. I didn't get to test your mic, but you should be okay. So we're going to check that in 1 second.
Let me go call him.
Yeah. And so with that being said, let me just start off. Obviously, folks, Dr. Art Laffer is one of the most renowned world economists at this time. By the way, I see we have Ronald Stafford has joined us. Good afternoon, Ron. It's good to have you here with us. I think this is going to be a very exciting conversation. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, about the economy, about tariffs. We're going to be talking about, well, the U.S. unemployment rate, but also we're going to be talking about Binghamton University. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is obviously what happened in November. And John Lezak, let me ask, you were at the event with Dr. Laffer.
Yes.
What happened, just as a summary?
All right, sure. So going back to November, we invited Dr. Arthur Laffer onto campus, and we expected this to be a clean, good event where he talks about the economy, he talks about tariffs, talks about trade. And instead of the positive reaction that we expected, we got a very negative reaction coming from progressives, leftists on campus who decided they thought it was a good idea to shut down our free speech. And they ultimately got our event canceled, removed, instead of letting Dr. Arthur Laffer speak.
Okay, and that's pretty sad when we see that the whole reaction from the left was to silence speech, to silence a great speaker. I mean, this was an event that the economy, I forget if it's the Economy Club or the Economics Club was invited from Binghamton University, right?
It was the finance.
Finance, okay. And so can you imagine if you're studying to be anyone in finance, economics, this is your career, this is what you're studying in school, and then suddenly, and you're going to go to see one of the most renowned individuals in the country, and then a group of, I don't know what to call them, just shut you down. That's terrible. Hang on 1 second, folks. I believe that's our guest.
It is.
Hello. Can you hear us all right?
Not really well, no.
All right. Well, Dr. Laffer, you're on live at the moment. I'm trying to fix this for you so you can hear us a little better.
I can hear you a little bit, but can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah. Yep,
Yes.
we can
We
hear
hear
you.
you perfectly.
Now, are you just going to be recording me, aren't you?
No, you're live. You are live.
I am live for how long?
As long as you want.
Now, what am I live on?
Oh, hang on 1 second. Guys, talk. Dr. Laffer. Okay.
So we're excited for another great episode of Michael Vasquez's No Soundbites Allowed show.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Trying to fill the air currently.
Of course. And of course we have
It's like a
Dr.
radio
Arthur
show.
Laffer with us.
It's a radio show.
Very
He's
exciting.
currently on the phone. We're just
Both. Yes, it's
Looks-
live, and then we're going to also have it on YouTube for people to be able to come back to it. All right. Don't worry, we can hear you perfectly on our side if you can't hear
All right,
us,
looks like
let us
things
know.
are going to begin very soon.
Repeating.
Yes, things are moving along. Yep.
Okay, one second.
Just fine.
Hey there, folks. Sorry about that. There's always some technical issues whenever you're doing anything live. And Dr. Laffer, we are with you still. And I've tried to improve the signal quality so you can hear us a little better, okay?
Yeah, but it's still very difficult to hear you.
Let's start off. Dr. Laffer, we have John Rastusha and John Lezak, sorry, my brain's going, who are students who are with you at Binghamton University. So I want to talk a little bit about that first. I want to talk about the Medal of Freedom you have. We want to talk about the economics of the United States. But let's start off with, I want to introduce John Rastusha and John Lezak. You guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laffer. I'm the one you've been keeping in contact with. It's good to, hear from you, and I'm so excited to talk to you and finally learn what you have to say before you got shut down. Really.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm not sure you really do want to hear what I have to say. It's boring, it's dull, it's old-fashioned, but hey, thank you.
You know what? We need strong economics in this country, and you are the one leading the way. I just read your book, Trumponomics, which you graciously sent me a copy of. It was fantastic. I'm reading a lot more economics with my work at the Leadership Institute. So, your theories and principles are truly groundbreaking, I can definitely say, and I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
Yes, and I am John Lezak. I was secretary of the club at the time of the event. I'm the current president. And I think it's very exciting what you were going to talk about. I am very interested in trade and tariffs, and I wanted to hear what you, the professional, had to say about this topic.
Well, I'd love to talk about it. And shall I go through some of the stuff I was going to say first?
Well,
I had some corny jokes I was going to tell.
Oh, man.
But, they require visual. Some of them require visual, but not really. I was going to tell a story about why I left California, but you all know why I left California, because of high taxes. I went to Nashville, Tennessee, because there's no income tax. We're the lowest tax state in the nation, fastest growing state in the nation, biggest surplus, but other than that, it's really terrible. No, I'm just joking. And then I was going to tell a little story about Schwarzenegger, how he referred to me as a little bitty tiny man, and he said, I starred with Danny DeVito. You remind me of Danny DeVito. I starred with him in Fins. So it was a funny little story, but that's what I was going to start with. And then I was going to talk about states a little bit with you, because coming from New York, as you guys do, you got to know that there's another half of this world as well. It's a much more progressive half.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
If you saw my book called The Wealth of States, I co-authored it with Travis Brown and Rex Sinkfield and Steve Moore as well. And if you look at that book, one of the chapters is called A Fall from Grace. And maybe I can go through that with you a little bit and just give you a sort of a 30,000-foot overview of what's happening within the country as well as our country versus the rest of the world. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. That's why we have you on.
Let me just say that, there are 50 states in this wonderful country of ours. In each of those states, there may be something like 70 counties. In each of those counties, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 municipalities, something like that. And we've been keeping data, meticulous data, for probably a century, maybe even more than a century, on each of these states. So we have a huge repository of information, of data, which really allows us to draw conclusions as to how things happen. There are no restrictions on people moving from one state to another. As long as you're willing to abide by the rules and laws of the state to which you're moving, you're perfectly free to do that, and no one can present any barriers. And we always also have the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which allows for no interference on the free movement of goods and services across state boundaries as well. So we have perfect human mobility as well as perfect goods mobility. We have one central government. We have a common language. So it's a perfect example of how to run experiments, because each state has its own tax policy, has its own regulatory policies, has its own this, that, and the other things, schools, etc., all of its spending. So we have a wonderful experiment here. And let me give you one chapter in that book that I wrote called The Fall from Grace. And what I did is I looked at the 11 states that have introduced the income tax since 1960. All right, there are 11 states that did not have an income tax in 1960 that currently do have an income tax. So what I did, I looked at each of these states. They're not really weirdo states. I mean, they're normal states. I mean, heck, you look at these states. Some of them there, like the most recent one is Connecticut. The income tax was put in 1991 by a Republican governor named Lowell Weicker, who happened to be a fellow Yalie, who put in the income tax in Connecticut. The first one put in this period now was put in 1961. That was in West Virginia. They put in an income tax. If you look at the additional states there, they're normal states. Maine put in an income tax. Rhode Island did. New Jersey did. Pennsylvania did. Ohio did. Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Nebraska. So those are the 11 states that have introduced the income tax since 1960. And that's really just 60 years, okay? And so what I did in this chapter was I wanted to see what the consequences were of introducing that income tax. So I took each state and I took the major economic metrics of each of those states in the 3 years prior to the introduction of the income tax. And then I looked at the last 3 years of those same metrics, most recent 3 years. So what I did was I lined each state up by the year it put in the income tax, looked at the 3 years prior to introducing the income tax, and then looked at the most recent 3 years for each of those states. And I hope you're following me carefully on this.
Yeah.
And the major economic metrics I'm talking about here are gross state product, employment, population, labor force, personal income. I have a migration data in there as well. And I'm also looking at total tax revenues. Now, the way I look at each of these for each of the states is I look at each of the states compared to the 39 states that did not have any change during this period. So, for example, I looked at Connecticut versus the 39 states that did not change their income tax rate status during the last 60 years. I looked at their gross state product, I looked at their population, I looked at their tax revenues, and all the others, all relative to the other 39 states. So I have a perfectly non-polluted data set. Now, if you do that, if you look at each of these states by looking at what they were before they put in the income tax and what they are now relative to the other 39 states, each and every one of those states, without one exception, declined relative to the rest of the nation. They declined relative to the rest of the nation, each and every one of those states, in every single metric, including tax revenues. So when you look at these states, every one of them declined in all of the major economic metrics relative to the rest of the nation. Now, those states declined, I mean, every single one of them declined by a very, very large amount. Some of them by huge amounts. For example, West Virginia's decline was by more than 50% relative to the rest of the nation, but all of them were up there in the 30% range decline relative to the rest of the nation. I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, in Michigan, prior to Romney, now this was Mitt Romney's father, George Romney, who was the governor of Michigan at the time, Republican. Prior to his putting in the income tax, Michigan was about 5.2% of the U.S. economy. Today, Michigan is about 2.7% of the U.S. economy.
Okay.
That's a catastrophic decline. Is everything else okay on that line?
Oh, no, everything's fine.
Yeah, we're good. We're still hear you.
Yep.
All right?
Oh, well, right.
It was a major, major decline in Michigan. The other states like Ohio and all those others also declined by a huge amount. I mean, it's just amazing how much they did. The one I'd love to do, love to describe is New Jersey.
Sure.
Let me just describe New Jersey to you if I can. In 1965, New Jersey had neither an income tax nor a sales tax. Neither one. It was the fastest growing state in the nation. People from everywhere were moving into New Jersey. It was the largest inflow migration state in the nation, and it ran a budget surplus.
Okay.
10 years ago, when my student was the governor of New Jersey, a guy named John Corzine, he was a student of mine at the University of Chicago.
Okay.
And by the way, just as I would have said to the audience there, in full disclosure, he was a C student. And after learning all about MF Global and all the scandals associated with him, I'm not even sure he earned the C. But New Jersey had the highest sales taxes, highest income taxes, highest property taxes in the nation. They were one of the most taxed states in the nation, slowest growing state in the nation, and people were leaving like rats out of a sinking ship, and it had a huge budget deficit. And when you look at all of these states, it's unambiguous. Taxes really, really matter. Every one of these states had tax revenue, in spite of the fact they introduced an income tax. Total tax revenues relative to the rest of the nation declined. I mean, when you think about it for a second, it's fairly straightforward. If you have two locations, A and B, if they raise taxes in B and they lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from B to A. You know, when you look at it, economics is all about incentives. And states operate just like everything else. It's all on incentives. Now, I also looked at each of these states with respect to the provision of public services, because if you look at it, it's obvious why states would raise taxes. They want better public services. And when you look at the public services, there is no evidence to suggest that the states that put in the income tax have provided better public services than have the other states that did not change their tax status at all. You know, in fact, there's some strong evidence that even the provision of public services declined substantially after they put in the income tax. It's just amazing that the problems arise there. Now, I hope that's understandable. I hope you can understand this in the context of the U.S. I've also got another chapter in that book, which is called the 9 members of the Lord of the Rings.
Before
to offset the 9 Nazgul. By the way, my grandchildren gave me that total, but I looked at the 9 zero income tax rate states, which is obviously Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Nevada, Washington, Alaska, South Dakota, New Hampshire, and Wyoming. I mean, those are the 9 zero income tax states. I compared those states with the ones with the highest income tax rates, and of course, the 9 zero income tax rate states just beat the living chambers out of the 9 states with the highest income tax rates in terms of economic growth and prosperity. So that's what I was going to go through first with you at my lecture there, and go through it fairly clearly, I hope, and with more, I would be jumping and stamping and waving my hands for the audience. So there would have been some visuals there as well. But it's really just to show you how powerful this is in states. If you look at New York lately, it's not been doing well. And the reason, I believe, is to a large extent it's very anti-growth, anti-business climate that is driving people out. They're leaving to go to Tennessee. They're leaving to go to Texas, to Florida, to other zero or lower income tax rate states.
Well, Dr.
So that's the first part of the talk I would have been doing. And any questions on that? Any comments you want to make?
Actually, yes, Doctor. I was trying to cut in just a little bit. Let me first mention that for our audience, if you wish to ask a question of Dr. Laffer, please remember to call 607-242-1582 so that we can get you on and you can ask your question. Separate of that, Dr. Laffer, a lot of people may not be familiar for one of the things that you are most well known for, which is the Laffer curve. And so one of the things they would want to ask about is, what is the Laffer curve? And in relation to the taxes that we're talking about, some of the things, the states and the observations you've made so far, how do those two things come together?
Well, let me talk about the Laffer curve. It's something that's been in economics for 1,000 years, maybe even longer. The Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun has a clear Laffer curve in it. It's been around, but for some reason around the 1930s, it got dropped. And while it's still in microeconomics all over the place, it hasn't been used in macroeconomics at all. So what the Laffer curve is, very simply, is it's the relationship between tax rates and total tax revenues. Now there are two effects tax rates have on total revenues. Number one, when you raise tax rates, you collect more tax revenue per dollar of tax base. That's true. That's the arithmetic effect. But then there's also the economic effect, which if you raise tax rates, you reduce the incentives to do an activity, and the tax base will decline. These two effects, the economic effect, which is the latter one, and the arithmetic effect, which is the former, always move in the opposite direction. When you raise tax rates, you have a smaller tax base, but you collect more revenue. When you have lower tax rates, you collect less revenue per dollar of tax base, but you'll have a larger tax base. These two effects always work in the opposite direction. And the point of it here is really very simple, is when the government raises tax rates, don't bet that 100% of the time you'll get more revenue. Sometimes you will get more revenue. That's true. But sometimes you'll also get less revenue. By raising tax rates above a certain point, the tax base will shrink by more than the tax rate went up, and the government will actually collect less revenues. So when you look at taxes, you always want to consider both effects, both the arithmetic effect and the economic effect. Now, if you draw this curve, let's say you've got an x-axis and a y-axis. At 100% tax rates, let's even make it bigger than that. Let's say at 110% tax rates. If every time you went into the office, instead of getting a check, you got a bill, how long would you work? Well, you wouldn't. There'd be no work, and even though tax rates were very high, there'd be no tax base, and there would be no tax revenues. Symmetrically, if you had a zero tax rate, again, while you maybe work a lot and everything, but there'd be no tax revenues because the government doesn't tax the tax base. So at zero tax rates, there will be no tax revenues, and at 100% tax rates, there will be no tax revenues. Now, when you start raising the tax rate from 0% to 1% to 2% to 3% to 4%, revenues will start rising, and they'll keep going up and up and up and up to a certain point. Likewise, when you lower tax rates from 100% to 99 to 98 to 97, sooner or later people will start working again. The government will start collecting revenues. And if you could look at it with the y-axis being the tax rate and the x-axis being total revenues, you'll see it shapes a sort of a U-shaped curve with respect to the y-axis relating tax rates to tax revenues. That is the Laffer curve. It's a conceptual idea, the purpose of which to make politicians and economists and other people realize that just because you raise tax rates doesn't mean you're going to collect more money. Sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't. And we have lots of examples historically to show this, but that's the Laffer curve. Now, up until the mid-1970s, from the 30s to the 1970s, it was just assumed by all macroeconomists that if you raise tax rates, you got more revenue. That's the way it was always assumed. But frankly, that's not what happened. And what I did was I reinstituted an old-timey idea, brought it back into economics, and it all of a sudden got to be very, very famous. By the way, I did not name it the Laffer curve.
Oh, who did?
That was Jude Winitsky of the Wall Street Journal, who when he saw me writing it on a napkin, doing that, he goes, "Oh my God, that's an epiphany," he said. And so he wrote this article called Taxes, Revenues, and the Laffer Curve. And from then on, the moniker of Laffer has been associated with that curve from time immemorial. I hope that explains the Laffer curve to you.
Absolutely. That definitely does. So in looking at the Laffer curve and thinking about the tax cuts that have been instituted by the prior Congress and by President Trump, we've seen a lot of jobs that have been created. We see a very low unemployment rate at 3.6%. Is that an effect of the Laffer curve of maximizing?
Well, sure, it's supply side economics, and the Laffer curve is associated with the tax revenues. I mean, all supply side economics is a very simple concept. Is that people like doing things they find attractive, and they don't like doing things they find unattractive. And government policies can affect the attractiveness of activities. For example, if you tax an activity, people find it less attractive and they'll do less of it. If you subsidize an activity, people will find that activity more attractive and they'll do more of it. And when you think of it, we tax speeders on the freeway. Why do we tax them on the freeway? To get them to stop speeding.
Right.
To make speeding less attractive. We tax cigarettes to get people to stop smoking. We make smoking less attractive. In the same way, taxes on income, on employment, and on profits also affect the attractiveness of those activities. And to see the point very clearly, I mean, let me just imagine, when you tax people who work,
right,
and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you?
Not really, no.
Don't be surprised if you find a lot of people not working. If you tax rich people and give the money to poor people, you're going to get lots and lots of poor people and no rich people. The dream in America has always been to make the poor richer, not to make the rich poorer. That's not what we do. You know, and I could go through all of these different things. I just went through the 2 locations with you on the states. You know, economics is all about incentives. Now people change their behavior when incentives are changed. Now, let me go to your question about the tax bill,
right,
which passed on December 22nd, 2017.
Right.
It cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Now, as far as the OECD is concerned, in 2017, 35% was the highest corporate tax rate in the OECD, the highest. By cutting that rate from 35% to 21% put us in the middle of the pack. Now that 35% was put in by George Herbert Walker Bush. We cut it to 34% under Reagan, but that yo-yo raised it from 34 to 35% in 1990. All right? And it had been that way for 25 years, more than 25, 27 years. All right? During that whole 27-year period, every single country in the OECD dropped its corporate tax rate to where we went from the middle of the pack to the very highest. All we did in the 2017 was to drop the rate back to the middle. We also, by the way, put in 100% expensing of capital purchases, which I could go through with you if you want me to, but let me not do it right here now. We also got rid of a global tax system. We were the only country in the OECD that taxed total profits of a company, no matter where they earned those profits. Every other country has allowed their profits to be taxed where they earned those profits. So that's called a territorial system. We put in a territorial system as well in the tax bill in 2017, which is a really big plus as well. 100% expensing of capital purchases, dropping the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21%. We also dropped the personal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37. Not that big a cut, but hey, you know, an extra dollar here or there, it never hurts.
That's
we
true.
put some pass-through provisions on individual companies. It became a political football, unfortunately, in the process. We got rid of the individual mandate in there, and we also put in the SALT deduction, which limited the deductions. Now, because you guys are in New York, I'm going to describe the SALT deduction to you carefully. In 2017, a person was allowed to deduct on his federal tax return all of his state tax payments. So in other words, if a New Yorker pays Cuomo $100 in taxes, that person is able to deduct that $100 from their federal tax return, thereby saving them $40 in taxes on a federal level. So what happens with a New Yorker is they pay $100 to Cuomo, It costs them only $60 because they get a rebate on the federal government. So they pay $60 and New York gets $100 and Tennessee pays the difference. Well, that president didn't think that was fair, nor do I. And so they got rid of the individual deductions, which means if you're going to pay Cuomo $100, that's what it's going to cost you. You don't get to borrow money from Tennessee and Florida and Texas. So that's what the bill was. Now, we did a lot of other things. We did a lot of deregulation, which was great. We did all sorts of stuff on monetary policy and trade policy. And let me go through the numbers with you. Mm-hmm. If you look at real GDP growth, which is the key feature here, if you look at real GDP growth going back to 2016, 2015, U.S. real GDP growth and Eurozone real GDP growth matched each other almost perfectly. I mean, quarter by quarter, they would be off by 0.1% one way or the other there. They were just perfectly aligned going through that. And I could show you the plot. It's just shocking how close the two regions were, the U.S. and the Eurozone. And by the way, with the rest of the world as well. In the third quarter of 2017, just before the tax bill took effect, but with the anticipation of this tax bill, U.S. real GDP grew a little bit higher than the Eurozone growth rate in the third quarter of 2017. In the fourth quarter of 2017, U.S. growth rate increased even more relative to the Eurozone. In every quarter of 2018, U.S. growth rates exceeded the Eurozone growth rates by quite a lot. Mm-hmm. In every quarter of 2019, the same thing was true. We outgrew the Eurozone every quarter from the third quarter of 2017 on through 2019. In fact, in the final quarter of 2019, we grew at 2.1%, and the Eurozone grew at 1%. You know, that was a 1.1% advantage. So what that means is that our growth rates have exceeded the rest of the world's by a substantial amount, which I attribute to the tax bill and to deregulation. If you look at the difference there, after 2 years, U.S. GDP was about 2.5% higher than it would have been had it grown at the Eurozone growth rate. Now, the year before, it was 1.25% higher than it would have been had it grown at the Eurozone growth rate. That total growth difference, 3.75% difference, that is about $700 billion difference, which is not something to sneeze at. That's $700 billion, unless our growth rates sink way down, and there's no sign of that happening. Unless they sink way down, that growth differential will last forever. $700 billion per year additional income is a huge amount of money. If you ask me, were the tax cuts and the deregulation worth it for the U.S. country? Yes. They were phenomenally productive of output, employment, and production. Now let me get to the fun one where you'll hear all the naysayers talk about it. We have incredibly good data on tax revenues.
Yes.
If you look at the tax revenues, in the 2 years up to, but not including the fourth quarter of 2017, and compare it to the 8 quarters of tax revenues starting in the fourth quarter of 2017 through the fourth quarter of 2019, if you look at that, total tax revenues, federal, state, and local, were 6.4% greater in the 2 years, including the quarter of the tax cut and on, than they were in the 8 quarters preceding, in the 8 quarters from the fourth quarter on, than they were in the 8 quarters prior to the fourth quarter of 2007. 6.4%. That's tax revenues grew at a 3.2% rate. Now that's federal, state, and local. If you look at just federal tax revenues in the 8 quarters, including the fourth quarter of 2017 on, grew by 5.2% greater than the 8 quarters up to through the third quarter of 2017. That's a 2.6% faster growth rate. These tax cuts not only paid for themselves, but they led to a phenomenal increase in output, employment, and production. In my view, I don't know what these other economists are talking about, and I don't know where they got their PhDs, because they sure as hell weren't in any class I either taught or took. When I did mine, we did it, math was correct. But these guys are just spouting nonsense when they say the tax cuts caused huge revenue losses. It's not true. The tax cuts clearly paid for themselves and have led to incredible prosperity, and it's not over yet. Already in the first quarter of 2020, it looks like we're going to grow way faster than the Eurozone. And the same thing's true going forward. So this is not over yet. The story's not over, and it's been a wonderfully beneficial elixir for the U.S. economy, the tax cuts. Now, I hope that comes clear in this podcast, what I've said. And I hope you guys get a chance. I'll be glad to send you a paper that documents the numbers if you want me to. But you know, it's just... all these people who say it's cost them blew a hole. You listen to all these Democratic candidates saying this nonsense. It's just crazy garbage.
And
the tax cuts paid for themselves right away and have led to a lot higher growth and a lot higher employment. And a great stock market, by the way.
True.
Any questions on that?
Well,
what I want to cover with you.
Kind of going off of what you said, I know you just mentioned the Democratic candidates running in 2020. And I know one of the big themes coming up right now is socialism, socialism, socialism. It seems like every single candidate right now is preaching socialism, and it seems like on college campuses, socialism is the big talking point. I wanted to know your thoughts on that, and if anything...
Let me just go on that right within... I'm going to describe socialism to you. I don't want to use a phrase. What I want to do is describe redistribution to you.
Sure.
Redistribution is where you take from those who have a lot and you give to those who have less. This, as far as I can tell, is what you're referring to as socialism. This is Bernie Sanders. This is Elizabeth Warren. It's
all of them.
Buttigieg. It's also Klobuchar to a lesser extent. It's also Joe Biden. It's also unfortunately it's the mayor Bloomberg of New York. It's all of these guys. And let me, if I can, when you see socialism rising on campuses, which you claim is rising, at the same time mathematics is falling. When you look at redistribution, it's math. It has nothing to do with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or conservative, a left-winger or a right-winger, whether you scream and holler with microphones, whether you dance. I mean, it really is purely math. Let me go through it with you very carefully.
Please, yeah.
When you have redistribution, what that means is you take from someone who has more, and you give that to someone who has less. Are you following me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
That is redistribution, very simply. You take from someone who has more, and you give to someone who has less. Now, whenever you take from someone who has more, you reduce that person's incentives to produce, and that person will produce a little bit less. Again, I want to make sure you're following what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Very much
When
so.
you take from someone who has more, you reduce that person's incentives, and they will produce a little bit less. By giving to someone who has less, you provide that person with an alternative source of income other than working, and that person, too, will produce a little bit less. In other words, if you pay people not to work, and you tax people who do work, you're going to get less work in the process. You follow me?
Absolutely.
Both the people you take the money from, they'll produce less, and the people you give the money to, they too will produce less. The theorem here, and it's a math theorem, damn it. It's not some sort of my opinion.
Right.
It's a math theorem that whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income, period. And I don't care who you are, as long as you can add a column of numbers, that's the answer you come to. Now, the lemma of this theorem is sort of cool. The theorem is that whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. The lemma of that theorem is equally as cool. The more you redistribute income, the greater will be the decline in total income. And again, I hope you follow that very clearly. And again, it's just math.
Right.
All right? Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. And the more you redistribute income, the greater will be the loss in total income. Now, the last part of this theorem, which is way cool, is it's the limit function. The limit function of this theorem is very simple. If you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone came out exactly the same, there will be no income at all. Now, let me explain to you how that works with an example. The only way you can redistribute income where everyone comes out exactly the same is if you tax people who make above the average income 100% of the excess, and you subsidize people below the average income up to the average income. Are you with me on that?
Yes, I am.
That's the only way you can guarantee everyone will come out the exact same. Now, if you actually did that, if you taxed everyone who made above the average income 100% of the excess, and you actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, so that no matter what you produced or earned, you would get the same amount, I will stipulate today, Counselor, we'll all come out the same at zero income. 100% redistribution of income leads to zero income in totality, period. Now, I used to have some fun with my students because my students, when I taught, they had not worked a lot. They didn't know who this FICA guy was who came in and grabbed a lot of your paycheck. They didn't understand that. So I tried to make the example so it fit within their context. So the way I gave the theorem here is I told my students, if I ran your country, if I ran this class the way the government runs your country, what I would do is I would flunk all the A students out, and I'd give all the F students scholarships. Now, before you giggle, think about it for a second. My A students happen to be a little bit smarter than my F students.
Yes.
So once I change the rules, my A students are able to get lower grades than my F students because they don't randomly make the mistake of ever guessing a correct answer. My A students still get all the scholarships, and my F students are still flunked out. I have not changed the distribution of grades one iota. But what have I done? What I have done is destroyed the entire quality of the educational process. Let me just say it very simply. You cannot change the distribution of income with taxes. You can't. But what you can do is change the volume of income with taxes. If you don't think for a moment there aren't rich people in Venezuela exploiting the poor, and they're all the military government tax collectors, or in the Soviet Union or any of these other places, you can't change the distribution of income. The poor are still just plain screwed. But what you have done is destroyed the entire volume of income of the society. I'm of a very different view. I think the best way to help the poor is to provide them with good, high-paying jobs, not with welfare handouts.
Definitely.
My view is a Kennedy view. I'm a Jack Kennedy fan, that the best form of welfare has always been and still is a good, high-paying job. That no American is ever made better off by pulling a fellow American down. And we're all made better off whenever any one of us is made better off. And the line that I stole for the president, for the real one, Ronald Reagan, in his race in 1980 was the Kennedy line, a rising tide, it raises all boats. And that's where you are in redistribution and socialism. It is, to me, ridiculous that these students are the way they are. But, it's their country. If they want to live under that system, they'll be impoverished beyond belief in that system. If the poor think that socialism is a way of getting ahead, they're going to be sorely mistaken, unfortunately. The best way to have a country do well, the best way would have all sectors of our economy do better is by having rapid economic growth, period. Do you understand what I just said?
Absolutely. And going...
Good. Please do. And it's math. It's not sociology. It's not anthropology. It's not whiffy, waffy, woofy. It's math.
Hard
And
numbers.
that's what it is. And these guys who are screaming the opposite line, they don't know straight up from sick'em.
And kind of going off of that, I mean, today we had you on to kind of talk about what you couldn't talk about, right? And what you're giving us right now is not controversial. Like you said, it's numbers. I mean, this is hard facts you're giving us. You're not giving us, your feelings or anything. You're giving us hard numbers. And why do you...
If I'd have been there, I'd have given you a big hug and I'd have showed you my feelings. But no, it's math. It's just plain math. And, I could sit down with anyone and go through the math. Get them in there. Everyone knows that this is classical economics. I mean, Seriously, it's crazy what people are suggesting these days.
Well, if I may, Dr. Laffer, let me ask you, because since we've talked about Binghamton University, the speech you were going to give, feelings, why do you think, considering that this is economics, it's math, and you're sharing this with us, and yes, it's great to hear about what you think about the tax cuts, the impact of them, the fact that Venezuela is not a great system to emulate. Why do you think they shut you down, literally? And I'm just showing people this.
Let me. I'm not going to answer that correctly for you.
Okay.
Let me just say that I think I was a bystander who was sort of caught in an issue on your campus.
Right.
I don't think that person who stood up there even knew who I was.
He didn't know your name.
Or really cared.
Right.
He disliked YAF. He disliked the Republicans. And he screamed and hollered, the guy who put on the Antifa mask or whatever it was up there. I don't think they really cared about me at all. I just happened to be collateral damage to them.
Yeah, because it was
30
30 seconds. It was 30 seconds in. I mean, I believe they didn't know what I was going to say. They were yelling cliches and all that stuff, and then the guards grabbed me and pulled me away. But that's what happened there. But I've lectured all over the nation in classes and places. I mean, my home turf of Yale. Last year I lectured there twice in open lectures, no resistance, nothing whatsoever. I was really quite disappointed that Binghamton, of all places, would have this type of response.
Definitely. And if I may, Dr.
I don't know why it is. You'll have to tell me what the sort of the student politics is in Binghamton, of all places, that would allow this to occur.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big point that they were attempting to push there was they tried to associate you with the Trump administration, and then something along the lines of mass incarceration. I don't know how you would tie into that, but that's.
Let me just say, yeah. I don't think no one associates me. I've never taken a job with the government, never will. I didn't even work for Reagan. I'm a Kennedy Democrat. I'm a Clinton Democrat. I'm a Reagan and Trump Republican. I did Jerry Brown's flat tax when he ran for president. God knows they wouldn't think of Jerry Brown as a super freaky right-winger.
Of course.
And Jerry Brown, I did his flat tax when he ran for president. I was Gary Hart's economist when he ran for president as a Democrat. I worked with Sam Nunn very closely, Democrat. Bradley Gephardt was my bill, along with Kemp Kasten. So, I've been on both sides of the aisle for as long as I can remember. It just depends on who has the better pro-growth policies. That's all I care about. And I would be very shocked if these people actually thought of me in any way, shape, or form. They just wanted to have a riot. And I think they just dislike two guys.
Yeah, but
and it's when I was when I was a student, the same types of things occurred as well.
Can confirm they don't like us.
But Dr. Laffer, if I may, I know I have a lot of friends listening to the show right now, from fellow interns at Leadership Institute and friends from Vestal and Binghamton, and I think they want to know if they they want to get more interested in economics, right? It's not the most exciting topic sometimes, but they are very interested in what you have to say and what your influencers are from. If you had to recommend something for them to read other than your own wonderful books, which they should have read by
What
now.
do you mean? What you're trying to get me to? You're trying to get me to proselytize for the opposition?
If you had to recommend one piece of literature for them to get a good understanding of economics,
Let me mention there's a bunch of literature that's not economics per se, but has very great economic content.
okay,
Kurt Vonnegut, in a short story called Harrison Bergeron, described my theorem on redistribution.
really,
Only there he did it with every feature of a human. The pretty people who had their faces scarred deliberately. Tall people were put with heavy weights so they'd be shorter. Smart people had little electrodes put in their brains so they'd be dumber. So that everyone would be exactly the same. Read Kurt Vonnegut's story, Harrison Bergeron. Read Bob Bartley's book, The Way the World Works, and you can see about our revolution in the 1980s and how that came about. You know, through the Wall Street Journal. You can see that. I mean, obviously you've got Trumponomics there, which is a fun read. But if
Of
you want to
course.
read really good stuff, look at my mathematical foundations of supply-side economics. If you're really an economist, it's all math. I'm sure you wouldn't find it fun. My international economics book, which is, again, all math, again, is very, very clear and precise mathematically on just how to look at economics.
absolutely.
There are a bunch of other books as well. Jude Winniski's book is one of the best ever I've read. It's called The Way the World Works by Jude Winniski. And it's a long historical view, like the Marxist review of history, only this is a capitalist review of history.
Right.
He looks at the whole thing in incredible detail, documents it. The Way the World Works by Jude Winniski. So there are a lot of books out there. I mean, there are the other ones that are really good as well. But these are the ones I'd suggest to you.
Awesome.
I think they're a lot better than most of the 60s and 70s literature. Is sort of chitty-chatty and is not the type of literature I like. I like math. I like things being very crisp, very clear, very theoretical, very precise. I'm not really into narratives and stories and that type of stuff. I mean, science is when you put precision into narrative and make it come out so it's truthful. So that's the way I'd go about it.
Now, if I may, we did title the event with you. We had the title Trump, Tariffs, Trade Wars. Now, getting into that, I'd like to hear your thoughts about the idea of tariffs and specifically the ones that have been instated with China.
You're going to exhaust this old professor. My best guess, and the president talked to me about this probably 2 years ago. He told me that he was a free trader. I believed him. I still do. He says that running an international business, you have to be a free trader. And I agree that you do. I joked with him. I said, also, sir, anytime anyone imports 2 foreign wives, they have to be a free trader. That's a joke.
Yeah.
You get it.
Yeah.
Okay, I wonder if you just get it.
Of course.
You Republicans are a little nerdy.
Sometimes.
Yeah, once in a
And
while.
he said, tariffs, whether put on by us or by them, hurts us. And it hurts them too. Trade, the gains from trade, David Ricardo, the comparative advantage, the competitive international system is a win-win system, not a win-lose, not a lose-win. It's a win-win or a lose-lose. And free trade is the best of all possible systems. And he told me, he said, these other countries have a lot more tariffs and a lot more restrictions than we do. Now, their tariffs and their restrictions hurt us. They do. But they also hurt them, but they're too dumb to realize that. He didn't use the word dumb. He said they're all mercantilists. And see, how do I get their attention? All they care about is their exports to the U.S. That's all they care about. So what I have decided to do was put tariffs on them and threaten tariffs on them if they don't come and negotiate a free trade deal. And, of course, I am not a negotiator, guys. But this is the way he explained it to me. And he said, I want freer trade, but I need them to come to the table to negotiate better trade for everyone.
Right.
And it made perfect sense to me, but, then you go through the actual implementation. Now that you can see the USMCA is passed and signed.
Yeah.
Now you got the first tranche of the China deal signed. We're well on our way with Britain on the negotiations there. We've got the deal with Japan signed. We've got the one with South Korea signed. I mean, this guy's a free trader, and the deals are coming through one after another. I had a bet with my fellow Yaley, Bob Woodward. I don't know if you know Woodward, Bernstein.
Yes.
Okay, well, he and I had a long talk about this. He said, "Oh no, Trump's a protectionist all the way," and all that. I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Oh, I'll bet you $1 we don't have a deal in the next 6 months." And I bet him $1, and then I bet him $1 that we'd have a deal within a year as well. I didn't know how long it would take. I have not received my $1 yet from him.
Well,
I don't know if I should expect to receive it or not, but
maybe I want to ask. You may get it in September because there's been a recent announcement or rumor that President Trump is looking to cut taxes for the middle class by 10%. And that's been out on Politico and a few other places.
It is, and one of my best friends is Larry Kudlow.
Yes.
He and I have been best friends for 30 years, and if anyone knows how to do good policy, Larry Kudlow's the best ever.
Right,
and Trump is very fortunate to have him, and we all are very fortunate to have Trump and Larry Kudlow.
Yeah.
Oh, I think they're brilliant.
I'm talking just economics, guys. All I ever talk is economics.
I understand, and I'm looking.
I don't get into abortion, pornography, gun control. None of that's in my turf.
No, I'm thinking about just the economics of the proposal of a 10% middle class tax cut. From your
Well, let's see what happens. Let's see what unfolds.
Do you think it could work?
Well, it can, of course, can work. But did you remember Einstein's phrase "Gott wohnt in den Feinheiten"?
Not in
God
those lines.
God lives in the details.
Right.
And as long as Larry Kudlow is doing the details, I'm perfectly certain that it'll be great. If the Obama guys were doing it, not so much so.
Okay. Fair.
Remember this, and this is why I've never taken a job with government. I did in 1970 to 72. I was the first chief economist at the OMB when it was formed. I was George Shultz's right-hand person. And ever since then, I've never taken a job with government, not with Reagan, not with Trump, not with Kennedy, none of them. And the reason is, once you take a job, you're an employee. And you cannot no longer carry out your own ideas. The point of it here is these people, these economists who go to work for government, and I'm talking basically the ones in W and Obama and some of the earlier ones, they will rebut arguments they know to be true in order to curry favors with their political benefactors. And that is not what I ever want to do. I don't want to ever tell you something I know is untrue.
Well, how about...
it turns me off.
Okay. How about something completely different? Because we may not have a few more minutes with you, but I did want to ask this. Because you received something that almost no one receives in the world. Besides the renown for economics, you received the freedom of metal.
The Medal of Freedom.
The Medal of Freedom. God, I say things backwards today. The Medal of Freedom. It's a high honor. It's the highest honor that a civilian can receive. And can you talk about that for a moment? What was that like?
Well, it's hard to talk about it without crying and blubbering. But no, seriously, I tell everyone, and I'm not. I mean, I make a joke out of it, but I was caught flat-footed with this. I think 4 economists in history have gotten it, and some of my greatest heroes have gotten it. And I look at myself in the mirror, and I honestly don't believe I deserve it, but I'm not giving it back. I tell another story I tell about it is, I think President Trump did that just to piss off Paul Krugman.
Do you know Mr. Krugman?
Huh?
Do you know Mr. Krugman?
Oh, very well, yes.
Disagree a bit, I imagine.
Well, he's disagreeable too. He's not to disagree. He had a bad senior year in high school. Let me just put it that way. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and I'm very sorry he does. But he's wrong, and it's just sad.
Right.
Because he's a very smart guy, and he can be a very nice man as well. and he's got just a charming wife. She's also a PhD economist, and it's very sorry that he doesn't take economics seriously and try to do it correctly. But he's got an issue. He's got an axe to grind. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and that's very sad. Because you sit down and talk to him, and he can be a very nice man.
Right.
I've been on Bill Maher with him. I've been on the whatchamacallit debates up in Canada with him, and the Monk debates. I've been on other stuff with him, and we had one that was I spent a weekend with him and Paul Romer and Mike Levitt. It was called the Genius Weekend, and put on by Shell Oil in Houston quite a while ago. And if you sit down with him, but he's just angry, and I'm not angry. I mean, I really want to make other people happy and better off. I don't have any groups that I want to see destroyed. I don't have any hate for anyone, and he does, and so do a lot of these other people.
Yeah.
And all I can say is I think they probably had very bad senior years in high school, and I'm very sorry that they were picked on or made fun of or something, but that's no reason to have bad motives for your economics. Do you follow me?
I do.
Absolutely.
I do.
Do you remember that movie Tombstone?
Of course.
Yeah, Kurt Russell, I think,
Kurt
was
Russell
in
and
it.
that and everything.
Yep.
And they were talking about Johnny Ringo.
Yeah.
And why does Johnny Ringo, the way he is, he's got a hole inside of him. There's no amount of stealing, robbing, murder, and lying, cheating, thieving things that will ever fill that hole up. And the one guy, I forget, it was Kurt Russell, asked Val Kilmer. He asked him, I said, well, why does he have that hole inside? Because he was born. And these people out there who are spitting negative, and it's both, it's everywhere in politics, because that's where you get a job, not for earning it, because you get elected to it. And, it's just a very bad way to run life, and I want you guys to make sure you never do it that way.
Absolutely.
We're here to help poor people. We're here to help rich people. We don't hate anyone. Everyone's a cool person. Black, white, tall, short, male, female, fat, skinny. Everyone is old, young. We're here to make everyone better off. And I just love the Kennedy quote on that, which I gave you earlier.
Right.
And that's the way we should be. And it's not A versus B. It's A plus B. And that's what bothers me about these people, Saez and Zuckman and Piketty and all of these people, the socialists. They hate the rich people. They hate rich people. And there's nothing wrong with rich people. The only thing wrong is that poor people aren't richer. The dream in America has always been to make the poor richer, not to make the rich poorer. I don't know if you agree with me on this, but we are here as one team.
Right.
And the team is for everyone to be better off, not just one group. And these other people don't believe it that way, guys. And your job is to make sure that the earth moves in the right direction of love, not hate, and of prosperity, not poverty, of support, not revenge. And you got to make sure that's the way we are. And just hope for the best and work your best off. And you guys are doing a great job, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, Dr. Laffer.
Thank you, Dr. Laffer. The final thought I would have, and I thank you because I know worldwide capitalism has led to some of the greatest growth of individuals lifting people out of poverty. But, and this kind of goes to my question, knowing that capitalism can work, knowing that economics as well as you do, what would you say to students who are in school right now and they're saying to themselves, gee, should I take economics? What can I do with economics?
Well, I don't know what they can do with economics. Some people are more adept at it than others. But let me just tell you, the supply side economics, the stuff I work on, incentives, it works no matter what the government form is. Now, it works in Chile under Pinochet. They created an incredible prosperity in Chile, as you may know. In 1970, I was the first American to go to China in modern times. I went in October of 1970. I went with George Shultz and John Ehrlichman. We did the pre-Kissinger trip. And I went there with my arms crossed while waiting to hate those people. there. But, in 1970, in China, 95% of all domestic production went through state-run enterprises. Today, that number's down to 3% is running through state-run enterprises. China, in 1994, pegged the yuan, the renminbi, to the U.S. dollar. They basically outsourced monetary policy to Alan Greenspan. They dollarized their economy. China also increased trade. They were the hermit kingdom before. They increased trade dramatically. Three of the pillars of supply-side economics, tax cuts, sound money, and free trade, China applied in the 1970s. They have had the most miraculous growth because of good economics. More people have been removed from the roles of poverty into middle class and prosperity in China than in the entire history of all of mankind for 190,000 years. I mean, it is amazing. Supply-side economics works. It works in communist countries. It works in capitalist countries. It works with democracies. It works with dictatorships. It's called economics. And that's where I come out on this stuff. Now, I personally am a big fan of democracies, but just remember, economics works. And it works across the board.
Oh, yeah.
It's all a matter of incentives. Purely and simply incentives. Any person, any society with the correct structure of incentives can conquer the universe. Any society with a maladjusted set of incentives can be the poorest nation that mankind has ever seen. The structures put in, the incentive structures put in on society will be manifest destiny for that society. And I really want you to understand this. It's economics. It's not freedom. It's not height. It's not gender. It's not weather. It's incentives. And if you reward good behavior and punish bad behavior, you're going to get a great, great society. But if you reward bad behavior and punish good behavior, God forbid that all hell is going to come crashing down on you.
Well,
you follow me? And that goes in every field you can think of.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, can I leave you with one story?
Absolutely.
All right, and this is the last story, and then I'll call it quits for you.
Okay.
Even socialists respond to incentives. Even socialists do. Now, let me tell you what I did. I went home, and I got a big pillowcase, all right? And I filled it chock full of $20 bills.
Yes.
And I tied it loosely with a little twine. And I tried to find out where in the United States was the most socialist place in the United States. And I came to the conclusion, you may disagree with me, but I came to the conclusion that the most socialist state in the United States has to be Massachusetts.
Really?
So I figured Massachusetts, the most socialist state in the nation. Then I asked myself, what city in Massachusetts is the most socialist city? And I came to the conclusion, of course I would come to this conclusion, it's Cambridge. The home of Harvard University.
Yeah, Harvard.
Yeah, and then I asked myself, what university in Cambridge is the most socialist university? And of course I came up with Harvard. Massachusetts, Cambridge, and Harvard. Then I asked myself, what department in Harvard is the most socialist department? And of course it has to be sociology. They're guys, weedy-leedy people. You know, they're bingos. They have the little hats with the propellers on the tops. You know, they're really crazy people. So I think the most socialist state, Massachusetts. The most socialist city, Cambridge. The most socialist university, Harvard. The most socialist department in that university was sociology. And then I figured out, when is the most socialist moment at the sociology department in Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts? And I came to the conclusion the most socialist moment was at the very end of a Bernie Sanders rally on the lawn outside of the sociology department at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You with me?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Okay, you've got this moment in history where socialism is pure drawn. And so I went there right at the Bernie Sanders rally. I took a wooden chair. It was outside of the lawn, And when Bernie Sanders gave his final free tuition, free college, no debt, blah, 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 100% taxes, blah, 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 Elizabeth Warren was standing next to him, jumping up and down and screaming, yay, 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 and the audience was going crazy. There was a slight breeze that day, so I stood up on my chair, all right? And I took my pillowcase of $20 bills, and I blew all those $20 bills up in the air, and they came floating down over the crowd. All right? Within 30 seconds, every single one of them had been picked up. Even socialists respond to incentives.
That says a lot.
And remember that. They do not believe personally what they talk about publicly.
Mm-hmm.
If they are dating a very pretty girl, they don't like the other guy who's trying to date her. Believe me when I tell you, they're very selfish. If they have a $20 bill lying on the street, they're going to pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
They will fight like mad over all sorts of things. They are just as greedy and just as avaricious as you and I are. Incentives matter to them. They just deny it. And they want to take what you have through their policies.
Well, that says...
You got me?
So
Oh, yeah.
You guys have loads of fun. I'm sorry I wasn't able to give my talk there.
Nope. Thank
But
you
I
for
love you
coming.
guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
It was a very entertaining time up there, and thank you. Maybe I'll come up again if you invite me.
Absolutely.
Always.
Thank you so
You're
much.
always welcome.
Okay, well, just invite me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Laffer.
Take care, guys.
You too.
You too.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was actually Dr. Art Laffer. And I have to say, it's incredible that so many people were so terrified of this conversation on economics, which had so little to do with politics other than economics. And yet we saw members of Plot do everything in the world to try and stop this conversation. And I find it quite interesting that they lost their minds over this conversation we just had for the last hour.
Yeah, I mean, without any context, if they were to just hear that conversation, I think they would just pass out. They would just be bored. They wouldn't understand what's going on. But it's just with the context that this is somewhat Trump associated that makes them lose their minds.
So, any other thoughts that you guys have? And I know John has to take off because he's got a
Boss.
bus and he's got to get back to DC. He's been doing a whole lot. But any other thoughts that you might have before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think it's very important to have these conversations. I think it's very good that we were able to reach out, get Dr. Laffer to come and give this talk, because to get shut down and then to just stop the conversation altogether and just give up, that gives them a win. But to bring it back and say, no, we're going to have this conversation and get through it is a very big victory for free speech and for any idea. And in this case, for the ideas of free market, free trade, but just in any context, we need to have these conversations.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people should take a look at, and we're going to have it a little bit more condensed, just his thoughts on, we were talking about what is the Laffer curve. We're talking about tax cuts for the middle class. We were talking about socialism and its impact on Venezuela versus the United States. His view of what happened real world at a Bernie Sanders event with Elizabeth Warren present. We talked about what happened at Binghamton University. We talked about tariffs. We talked about the U.S. economy as it exists right now and where it's going in the future. We talked about the viewpoints of Mr. Krugman, economist Krugman, and Kudlow. We've covered basically an entire economics course in 1 hour.
A lot of content. He gives a lot of content in a very short amount of time.
And I'm sure there's many economics students that'll take a lot out of this, but I think a lot of people will take stuff out of this. And I'm happy that we were able to give him a platform to be able to share free speech with the public, to express his ideas without being protested, without being shut down, without being stopped. Because I don't think anything he said was so devastating, so damaging, so dangerous that the public couldn't hear it.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't offended by that. I don't know, were you?
Not at all.
All right. Fantastic.
But folks, we are always happy to hear from you. We are looking forward to hearing from you more in the future, of course. We're going to be putting this on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, and you'll be able to look it up at the No Soundbites Allowed site. And, of course, send us your messages. Send us comments on text at 607-242-1582. If you're looking forward to leaving us a message on Facebook, we'll respond there as well. But let us know who else you want to hear from. We'll reach out to everyone. But with that, I want to thank you for your Sunday night listening to Dr. Art Laffer, joining John Lezak, John Rastusha, myself on this wonderful conversation. And I'm so happy we were able to give Binghamton University, the city of Binghamton, the county of Broome, the U.S. citizenry, everyone in the world, the opportunity to hear Dr. Art Laffer when he was shut, as opposed to when he was shut down in November, to give him that opportunity to have a conversation now. So I definitely want to thank him for that.
Yes. And thank you for setting this whole thing up. It's been wonderful.
All right. So, folks, be well. We'll talk to you again soon. And enjoy the rest of Sunday. Monday is work day again, so we'll be there soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.